If you think Star Trek is only about space and adventure, think again. Because Star Trek isn't just a show, it's a collection of deep mysteries and controversies wrapped into one. And beneath the bold adventures, the iconic characters, and the timeless stories is a whole different side to the show that producers tried so hard to hide. Most people do not realize that some Star Trek episodes carry secrets that are so wild and so surprising they could change the way you see the show forever. So, what really happened behind those starry doors? And why did producers try so desperately to keep some of these details buried? You'll be shocked to find out the truth. The making of Star Trek. Star Trek was the franchise that boldly went where no television show had gone before, and it took generations of fans along for the ride. But behind the glossy uniforms and shining starships, things were actually a lot more complicated. And the story of how Star Trek even came to be in the first place is just as fascinating as anything you'll find in the show itself. It all started in the early 1960s, right in the middle of the space race, and a time when television was still growing into what we now think of as modern storytelling. The man behind it all was Gene Roddenberry, a former pilot, police officer, and television writer who had a wild idea. He imagined a science fiction series set in space, where a group of humans and aliens worked together to explore the universe. But more than that, he saw his new film idea as a way to sneak social commentary into prime time. Roddenberry's pitch wasn't just about aliens and spaceships. It was about humanity's future, one where race, gender, and nationality weren't obstacles. He made his crew diverse on purpose. There was a Japanese helmsman, a black female communications officer, a Russian navigator, and even a half-human, half-Vulcan science officer. And this was quite radical for the 1960s. Star Trek. The original series first aired on September 8, 1966. It starred William Shatner as the bold Captain James Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as the logical Mr. Spock, and DeForest Kelley as the ever-emotional Dr. McCoy. At first, the show didn't exactly blow up in the ratings. In fact, it struggled to stay alive. NBC nearly canceled it after the second season, and it only made it to a third thanks to a major letter-writing campaign by fans. This rocky start laid the foundation for everything that followed. Its episodes tackled heavy themes like racism, war, dictatorship, and ethics, but did so through alien planets and futuristic technology. One of the biggest achievements was the fact that Star Trek featured the first-ever interracial kiss on American television between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols. That moment alone sparked headlines and controversy, but it also broke barriers, showing what kind of future was possible. After its cancellation in 1969, Star Trek seemed like just another show that didn't make it. But then, something unexpected happened. In reruns and syndication, the show found a whole new life. A huge fan base started to grow, conventions popped up, fan clubs exploded. People began dressing up as Spock and speaking Klingon. And just like that, Star Trek became something bigger than just a TV show. It became a movement. By the 1970s, the fan energy was so strong that Hollywood couldn't ignore it anymore, and it led to Star Trek, the motion picture in 1979, bringing the original crew to the big screen. And while that first film was a little slow and philosophical, it opened the door for a whole series of movies, including fan favorite The Wrath of Khan in 1982. From there, things just kept expanding. In 1987, Star Trek: The Next Generation launched with a brand new cast led by Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Unlike the rough-and-tumble Kirk, Picard was a totally different kind of leader. He was thoughtful, diplomatic, and wise. The show ran for 7 seasons and was a massive success, proving that Star Trek wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a full-blown universe. And with this, the producers decided to go even bigger. They launched more episodes, and in all, the franchise has delivered over 900 episodes, 13 feature films, and dozens of books, comics, and games, making it a global phenomenon with fans from every walk of life. But Star Trek didn't just entertain, it also inspired. Many NASA scientists, tech developers, and astronauts have repeatedly said they were influenced by Star Trek growing up. In fact, in 1991, NASA named the first space shuttle Enterprise after the famous Starship, and that tells you everything you need to know about the show's reach. When it comes to Star Trek's achievements, it's not just about Emmys and box office numbers, it's about the real-life changes it brought. But with so many achievements, so much love from fans, and decades of ongoing success, you'd think the story behind the scenes was just as smooth and bright as they made it seem. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Because while the camera was rolling and the writers were crafting some of the most powerful science fiction stories of all time, there was a storm brewing behind the scenes. There was drama, power struggles, racism, egos, and decisions made by producers that nearly tore the entire thing apart. In fact, some of those Star Trek facts weren't just forgotten, they were actually hidden on purpose. But why? What were the producers so eager to bury? And what really happened behind the scenes of the show? Behind-the-scenes challenges that almost ruined Star Trek. Behind the scenes, Star Trek. The original series faced one challenge after another, and some of these challenges nearly shut down the entire production before it even got off the ground. And if you thought it was all smooth sailing from day one, think again, because the truth is far more chaotic. Let's start with the financial problems. From the beginning, Star Trek was expensive to produce. The sets, the makeup, the props, and the special effects all added up quickly. Back in the 1960s, most TV shows didn't require elaborate alien landscapes or starship interiors, but Star Trek did, and that made NBC nervous. The original pilot episode, The Cage, was filmed in 1964 and starred Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike, not William Shatner. It was ambitious and expensive, and although the network was intrigued, they didn't think it would work. But instead of pulling the plug, they did something no network had ever done before by ordering a second pilot. That second pilot became Where No Man Has Gone Before, this time with William Shatner as Captain Kirk. NBC liked it more, but they still weren't sold on the show's strange, philosophical tone. And once the series actually started airing in 1966, it quickly became clear that the ratings were not great. By the third season, the show was still on life support. The network slashed the budget even more and moved the show to a terrible time slot, where it was basically set up to fail. And that's one of the big reasons why the original series only lasted 3 seasons. But that wasn't the only challenge. Gene Roddenberry, the man with the vision, saw Star Trek as much more than just science fiction. He believed it could be a platform to talk about real-world issues like racism, war, sexism, politics, peace, and ethics. He wanted the show to reflect what humanity could become if it chose hope over fear. But unfortunately, the network wasn't always on board with that. Over and over, Roddenberry clashed with the network over scripts and storylines. He pushed for interracial representation, strong female characters, and complex moral questions. However, the network wanted simpler, more action-packed stories. They were worried that Roddenberry's bold ideas would alienate audiences or even sponsors. For example, the episode Plato's Stepchildren, which featured the first interracial kiss on American television, had the network completely worried about how audiences in the South would react. They wanted to remove the scene, reshoot it, or at least offer an alternate version. However, Shatner and Nichols refused to cooperate, and during filming, Shatner intentionally flubbed all the alternate takes so that the network would have no choice but to use that scene. Roddenberry was caught in the constant battle of trying to keep his vision intact, while executives kept trying to water it down. Eventually, the constant push and pull wore him down. By the time Season 3 rolled around, he stepped back from day-to-day involvement, frustrated and burned out. The show survived, but his influence had already started to fade. So, between the tight budgets and the network battles, Star Trek, the original series, was held together with equal parts creativity, stubbornness, and sheer will. Yet even with all those challenges, the show made it to air and changed the landscape of TV forever. The people involved believed in what they were doing, and that belief carried them through some incredibly tough moments. But while the network battles were rough and the financial stress was constant, there was another layer of tension brewing behind the scenes. And this time, it wasn't about money or script approvals, it was about the cast and crew. Because even with all the hope and unity being projected on screen, not everyone got along once the cameras stopped rolling. Hidden conflicts among the Star Trek cast and crew. For a show that imagined a future of peace, teamwork, and mutual respect, Star Trek had its fair share of real-world drama and conflicts happening when the cameras weren't rolling. These conflicts didn't destroy the show, but they left a lasting mark on the set, in the editing room, and in the decades of fan speculation that followed. And while some of these stories remained quiet for years, others were impossible to hide, even back then. Perhaps the most famous and complicated dynamic was with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. On screen, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock were the heart of the Enterprise and a perfect balance of emotion, logic, action, and intellect. However, off-screen, things were far less balanced. William Shatner, by all accounts, was seen by some of his co-stars as dominating and sometimes oblivious to how others felt about his behavior. Several cast members have openly expressed frustration over Shatner's tendency to grab the spotlight and push for more lines, close-ups, and screen time at the expense of his co-stars. Leonard Nimoy, who played the iconic Spock, initially got along with Shatner. But as the show progressed, their working relationship became more strained. Nimoy's character grew massively popular, sometimes even eclipsing Kirk in fan interest. That shift may have quietly fueled tension and a rivalry, with Nimoy later recalling feeling frustrated when he noticed Shatner frequently stepping into shots meant to focus on Spock. In interviews, Shatner has admitted he wasn't always aware of how his actions affected others, and he's since expressed regret. Over time, especially in the years after the series ended, the relationship between Shatner and Nimoy went through ups and downs. They reconciled several times, but by the final years of Nimoy's life, their friendship had gone sour. According to Shatner, Nimoy stopped speaking to him entirely toward the end, and to this day, Shatner says he still doesn't know why. In an interview, he said, "I just don't know, and it is sad, and it is permanent. I don't know why he stopped talking to me." They shared a complicated bond, shaped by rivalry, respect, and the pressures of two men who became cultural icons far quicker than they ever expected. But beyond these two major players, there were also smaller but persistent feuds among the rest of the crew. For example, James Doohan, who played the beloved Scotty, had a very awkward relationship with William Shatner. In multiple interviews over the years, Doohan didn't hold back. He accused Shatner of being self-centered and dismissive, especially toward the supporting cast. According to Doohan, Shatner rarely made an effort to build personal relationships off-screen, which made working with him difficult. George Takei, who played Sulu, echoed similar sentiments. Takei has been very open over the years about the lack of friendship with Shatner. He claimed that Shatner often acted as if the rest of the cast didn't exist, unless they were in his scenes. Sadly, their feud continued well into the modern era, with public jabs traded in books, interviews, and even on social media. Interestingly, though, Takei and Nimoy became close friends. Perhaps it was a bond formed by shared frustrations. Nichelle Nichols, who portrayed Uhura, didn't engage in feuds publicly, but she too expressed disappointment at how some cast members were treated, and how uneven the focus was across characters. Despite being part of a groundbreaking cast, she often felt sidelined, especially by scripts that didn't fully utilize her character's potential. These tensions didn't always explode into shouting matches or dramatic confrontations, but they created a wave of discomfort that lingered throughout the show's 3-year run. Everyone remained professional enough to keep the ship running, but it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Although these behind-the-scenes feuds didn't stop Star Trek from becoming a sci-fi landmark, they did affect the environment on set. But if you think tension among the cast and producers was the strangest thing happening on the Enterprise, think again, because there were some really bizarre moments and strange incidents that happened during filming. There were reports of accidents and unexplained events that still puzzle fans and crew members alike. Strange on-set incidents during filming. While Star Trek transported viewers to distant galaxies and futuristic civilizations, in reality, things weren't always as controlled or high-tech behind the scenes. In fact, the set of the original series was nothing like the polished corridors of the Starship Enterprise the show portrayed. And some of the incidents that occurred on the set were so dangerous or bizarre that they disrupted production schedules and permanently affected some members of the cast. One of the major parts of Star Trek's visual storytelling was explosions. The ship needed to look like it was under attack, planets had to seem unstable, and lasers had to miss their marks and hit walls with dramatic force. But in the 1960s, special effects didn't have the safety nets that modern productions rely on. Most of the effects were done live on set, using real pyrotechnics, and that led to serious problems. One of the most alarming incidents happened during the filming of the episode Arena. In the scene where Captain Kirk battles the Gorn, the crew used small explosive charges to simulate phaser blasts hitting the rocky terrain. However, one of those explosions went off too close to William Shatner, and that was the beginning of a lifetime of hearing problems. Shatner has spoken in interviews about how he lost some hearing in one ear because of the blast. The noise was far louder than expected, and the concussion from the blast caught him off guard. Sadly, the damage turned out to be permanent, and he still experiences ringing in his ear, a condition known as tinnitus. But it didn't stop there. In other episodes, like The Apple, live charges were reportedly placed near actors to simulate phaser damage. While no one was seriously injured during that shoot, cast members later recalled just how risky it felt being inches from mini explosions. But what surprised fans was the fact that the actors often had no ear protection and very little warning of when charges would detonate. Today, productions would never allow this level of danger without strict controls. But in the 1960s, the priority was visual impact, even if it meant putting actors a little too close to the action. But that wasn't the only time the cast members were exposed to danger, because during filming, there were insider reports of animal attacks that almost happened. While Star Trek often used elaborate alien costumes and props, there were times when live animals were brought on set to act as creatures from other worlds. The idea sounded creative on paper, but in practice, it was unpredictable. One of the most infamous cases involved the episode Shore Leave, where the crew travels to a planet that brings their thoughts to life. For a brief scene, the producers made the bold decision to rent a real tiger. However, the big cat wasn't as cooperative as the script had hoped. During filming, the tiger reportedly broke loose from its handlers for a brief moment, causing panic on set. Though no one was hurt, cast and crew scattered as the animal moved around the set freely. The situation was finally brought under control quickly, but it shook everyone up and was a huge reminder that mixing sci-fi and wildlife was not always a good idea. But beyond the explosions and animals, there were also regular old accidents that happened because people were tired, rushing, or just unlucky. There were reports of stuntmen sustaining injuries, and even William Shatner reportedly had more than one close call, not just with explosions, but also with basic stunts. Because Star Trek was filmed on a very tight budget with a limited crew, there wasn't always time for rehearsals or backup plans. And this resulted in accidents that happened more often than fans realized. And many of them were kept quiet for years. But that's not where the chaos ends, because despite all the high-tech vision of the future, much of Star Trek was held together with fishing wires, plywood, and sheer grit. The production team had to get creative with effects, sometimes dangerously so. This led to sparks that misfired to props that fell apart mid-scene, and the cast and crew often had to adapt on the go. The strange incidents weren't just one-off events, they became part of the rhythm of making the show. In fact, many fans don't realize just how low-budget the original show really was. Unlike the big-budget sci-fi epics of today, Star Trek had to stretch every dollar. That meant risky shortcuts, fast setups, and a lot of crossed fingers. But the good thing is that somehow they made it work. And maybe that's what makes these stories so fascinating. The show was set in a distant future, with starships and alien diplomacy, but the actual filming was full of unpredictable dangers and very human mistakes. But not everything behind the scenes was physical. Some things were more political and even controversial. Most fans do not realize that there were entire storylines that got censored, altered, or buried altogether by the producers, the network, and even the creators themselves. Because when you're pushing boundaries in the 1960s, especially with a show as bold as Star Trek, not everyone is on board with the message. Some topics were deemed too risky, some episodes got pulled, and some scripts never even saw the light of day. Controversies, censorship, and hidden storylines in the original Star Trek. For a show that boldly went where no man had gone before, Star Trek didn't just challenge the boundaries of space, it challenged the boundaries of television itself. From race and politics to religion and war, Star Trek dared to ask questions most shows of the 60s wouldn't even whisper. But that boldness came at a price. While the show was progressive in many ways, especially for its time, not every original Star Trek episode has aged gracefully. As a product of the 60s, certain storylines, depictions, or ideas now feel awkward, outdated, or even offensive by modern standards. One frequently cited example is the episode Who Mourns for Adonai? In this story, the Enterprise crew encounters a powerful alien being who claims to be the Greek god Apollo. At first, the episode seems like a mythological sci-fi adventure, but when you dig deeper, it gets a little uncomfortable. In the original script, the character of Apollo was supposed to be much darker and more manipulative, using his power to essentially enslave the crew and take a human woman, Carolyn Palamas, as his unwilling bride. That storyline was eventually toned down. But even the final version still includes scenes where Apollo forces affection on her and controls her mind. The episode's handling of gender roles and consent has sparked criticism in recent years. Many critics have pointed out that it reflects a broader pattern in 1960s television, where women were often objectified or written into passive roles. While Star Trek was far ahead of many of its peers, it still carried those limitations, especially in early episodes. Another example is Plato's Stepchildren, which famously includes one of the first interracial kisses on American television between Captain Kirk and Uhura. While the scene was groundbreaking and often celebrated, it wasn't without its controversy. The characters were under mind control when the kiss happened, and some fans have pointed out that this took away their agency and made the scene less of a romantic milestone and more of a forced event. These aren't the only episodes that raise eyebrows today. Critics have pointed out the portrayal of foreign cultures, the use of stereotypes, and how certain stories have a different meaning now than they did back then. While some scenes in Star Trek were self-edited by the writers and producers, others were censored outright, either by American networks or international broadcasters, and some episodes were even banned entirely. In the United States, NBC occasionally stepped in to tone down themes that it considered too adult, political, or controversial. Scripts that touched too directly on Vietnam, race riots, or organized religion were sometimes altered before filming. But outside the United States, things were even stricter. One of the most notable examples of censorship happened in the United Kingdom, where the British Broadcasting Corporation aired a heavily edited version of Star Trek. In fact, several episodes of the original series were outright banned by the corporation during its initial run. According to the corporation, they found these episodes too disturbing for early evening audiences. In particular, scenes involving torture or psychological cruelty were considered unfit for television, and some of the banned episodes weren't broadcast in the United Kingdom until decades after their initial debut. But the censorship didn't stop there. Even after the original series ended, some reruns and syndication packages came with edited scenes or altered dialogue. In some cases, episodes were shortened to fit new time slots, resulting in lost moments that fans didn't even know were missing. But beyond the episodes that aired, or didn't, there's a whole hidden world of Star Trek stories that were quietly shelved. Some were altered drastically during production. Others were left unfinished or forgotten due to budget cuts, scheduling issues, or creative disagreements between the writers, producers, and the network. There were also several cases of unfinished character arcs. For instance, Yeoman Janice Rand, played by Grace Lee Whitney, was meant to be a recurring character with a deeper relationship with Captain Kirk. But she was abruptly written out of the series due to behind-the-scenes conflicts and budget considerations, and her departure left several threads unresolved. Roddenberry originally envisioned a darker, more intellectual tone for the show, with slower pacing and heavy moral themes. But NBC tried so hard to hide these themes, and so they pressured the writers to make it faster and more accessible. And that tension between thought-provoking storytelling and mass appeal would remain a struggle throughout the original series. Some storylines were even altered mid-production to dodge network interference. For example, in the episode The Omega Glory, Roddenberry actually included a controversial scene that directly referenced the American Constitution being found on an alien planet. While the final version kept the idea, earlier drafts were even more politically controversial, and the network had to force them to edit these scripts before filming even began. When we look at the full picture, it becomes clear that Star Trek, for all its innovation, was constantly navigating a minefield of restrictions. Roddenberry and his team had bold ideas. They wanted to tell stories about extremely sensitive themes, and although they often did, many times, those ideas had to be hidden under layers of parables or even cut altogether. Some fans might be surprised to learn that entire episodes were written and then never filmed. These scripts are now studied by historians and fans who wonder how different the series might have been if those episodes had made it to air. Some insiders claim that these unfilmed episodes included stories about civil rights, political revolutions, and even intergalactic religion that would have shifted something in the world or could have birthed a movement. But sadly, the 1960s television landscape just wasn't ready for them. And yet, what's most fascinating is how much of that spirit still made it onto the screen. Even with censorship, budget issues, and creative clashes, Star Trek pushed forward. The creators found clever ways to hide meaning in metaphor, and in doing so, they laid the groundwork for the many Star Trek series that would come after. Star Trek isn't just a sci-fi series. It's a piece of television history that broke ground, challenged norms, and sparked imaginations across generations. Behind the scenes, it was messy, bold, and often chaotic. But that's what made it real. The creative battles, strange accidents, and hidden layer only add to its legendary status. And now that the veil has been pulled back, fans can appreciate not just what made it to the screen, but everything it took to get there. What's your favorite Star Trek moment? Tell us in the comment section below. Don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.